The raven came with a message sealed in green wax, bearing the stag of House Baratheon. Ned Stark turned the scroll over in his hand, feeling the weight of decisions settle in his chest heavier than the northern snows. He had spent sleepless nights, agonizing over the future of the realm since King Robert's death, and this message from Renly was a call to arms he hadn't anticipated. In the dim light of the Tower of the Hand, Ned unfolded the parchment and read Renly's words. A promise of swift action. A new king crowned before the Lannisters could tighten their grip. Catelyn watched him from the window seat, her hands nervously knotting in her lap. "You must choose quickly, Ned," she said, her voice thin with worry. "Delay could cost us everything." He thought of the children, his own scattered and vulnerable. He thought of Robert's children, or rather the Lannister bastards that wore the crown's guise. He thought of honor, and how brittle it seemed. In King's Landing, where smiles were knives and truth was just another cloak. For the first time in days, he set honor aside. "We will support Renly," he said quietly. The words tasted strange, but right. If Renly took the throne quickly, if the power of Storm's End and the North combined, perhaps bloodshed could be avoided. Perhaps the wolves and stags together could chase away the lions before the war tore Westeros apart. Within the hour, he sent out his ravens, one to Renly, pledging the North's support, another to Stannis, a dangerous gamble, offering a seat at the table, a chance to avoid brother fighting brother. And to his bannermen in the north he sent a single, simple command: prepare for war. Littlefinger's smirk faltered when Ned informed the small council of his decision. Varys raised a thin eyebrow but said nothing. Grand Maester Pycelle protested, feebly about rightful heirs and due process, but no one listened. The city buzzed with rumors of Renly mustering forces at Highgarden, of Tyrell banners flying alongside Baratheon ones. Renly arrived 3 days later with an army at his back and a crown of gold upon his brow. He met Ned privately in the Red Keep's Godswood, beneath the strange southern trees that still made Ned uneasy. Renly was young, almost absurdly so for a king, but his armor gleamed bright and his voice carried the easy confidence of a man who had never been beaten. "You chose wisely, Lord Stark," Renly said, clasping Ned's forearm like a brother in arms. "Together we will restore order." Ned looked into Renly's green eyes and wondered if he had traded one set of dangers for another. "We will need to move quickly," Ned said. "Cersei will not sit idle, nor will I," Renly promised, and in that moment, the course of history twisted on a different path. That night, under the cover of darkness, Ned's men seized the gates. The gold cloaks, bought and sworn to Ned with promises of stability, turned on the Lannister guards. Blood spilled in the alleyways. Shouts echoed off the stone walls. By dawn, King's Landing was Renly's. Cersei and her children were prisoners in Maegor's holdfast. Jaime Lannister, hearing the news from the field, retreated toward Casterly Rock with what few loyal men he could rally. Tywin Lannister, cold and calculating, began to call his banners. The war was not over. No, it had only just begun. But for the first time, Ned Stark held a blade that could change the shape of the Seven Kingdoms, and he meant to wield it carefully, before it slipped from his grasp and turned on him. The first days of Renly's reign were filled with the kind of uneasy peace that only fools mistook for victory. Ned knew better. He stood at the windows of the Tower of the Hand, looking down over the restless streets of King's Landing. The people cheered for a new king, yes, but hunger still gnawed at them, and fear rode on every whispered rumor. It was a city waiting to tear itself apart at the first wrong move. Renly moved quickly, surrounding himself with bright young lords, who laughed too loudly and swore loyalty too easily. Sir Loras Tyrell, golden and smiling, never left his side. And behind Loras stood Mace Tyrell, eager for his house to rise higher still. Ned could see it plain as day. Renly might have worn the crown, but the Tyrells already had their fingers around it. Catelyn urged him to return home, to bring Sansa and Arya back to Winterfell before the city's rot seeped into their bones. Ned agreed in his heart, but his duty held him firm. If he left now, the fragile alliance he'd helped forge could shatter overnight. They sat in council chambers thick with the scent of sweaty armor and old parchment, planning how to deal with the Lannisters. News had come that Jaime had taken Riverrun by force. Lord Hoster Tully was besieged in his own hall, and the Riverlands burned under the lion's paw. "We must strike before Tywin gathers his full strength," Ned said, voice low and steady. Renly drummed his fingers on the table, bored already. "And who shall lead this glorious charge? You, Lord Stark, or perhaps my good brother Stannis, who pouts on Dragonstone like a jilted maiden?" The room chuckled at Renly's jibe, but Ned's face remained stony. "Every day we delay, good men die. Stannis is no fool, he will not forget he has a claim, nor will he forgive being overlooked." Renly waved a hand dismissively. "Stannis has the charisma of a boiled fish. Let him sulk. I am king now, and with your Northmen and my banners we are strong enough to break the lions and anyone else who stands against us." Ned clenched his jaw, choosing his next words with care. "Strength is not only numbers, Your Grace. It is wisdom and unity. If we lose the Riverlands, we lose the heart of the realm." For a moment Renly's boyish charm slipped, and something colder showed beneath. "You would do well to remember, Lord Stark," he said softly, "that it was your choice to support me. Loyalty is not a river to be forded whenever it suits you." Ned inclined his head, the picture of northern calm. But inside something shifted. He had thrown his lot in with Renly Baratheon, and already he wondered if he had tied the North's fate to a gilded blade that would shatter at the first real blow. That night, Catelyn found him brooding in the Godswood again, his hand resting on the hilt of ice. "You doubt him," she said simply. "I doubt them all," he answered. "But doubt will not change the course we've set." She knelt beside him, taking his hand in hers. "Then we must be ready, Ned, ready for when the wolves must fend for themselves." Above them, the southern Godswood trees whispered in the warm night air, strangers to the old gods of the north, and Ned Stark, who had once believed so fiercely in honor, began to understand that survival might demand far crueler things than oaths and swords. The first real blow came with blood and fire at the borders of the Riverlands. Tywin Lannister, that old lion who had seen more battles than most of Renly's young lords, had years behind them, struck hard and without mercy. Villages burned, small folk were butchered, and every delay in King's Landing had given Tywin the time he needed to gather his strength. Ravens brought grim tidings daily. Riverrun had not yet fallen, but it was gasping under siege. Lord Hoster's banners barely held the fords of the Red Fork. Worse still, whispers came of Robb Stark, Ned's own son, rallying the northern lords, and marching south with a vengeance in his heart and a direwolf at his side. Ned sat in the council chamber as the Maester read the latest reports, the flickering candles making shadows dance across the maps. He listened, silent, while Renly smiled and spoke of grand strategies that sounded more like a tourney than a war. Around him, the Tyrells and their allies nodded eagerly, thinking of glory, thinking of plunder. No one seemed to think of the cost. "We must strike Tywin before he crushes Riverrun," Ned said once the Maester had finished. "If Robb arrives and finds the Riverlords broken, he may think us weak, or worse, you 2014, think us no different than the Lannisters." Renly toyed with a silver goblet, spinning it between his fingers. "Let the boy come," he said lightly. "We can deal with him after we've taken Casterly Rock. Imagine the wealth. The gold alone could feed 10 armies for 10 years. "Farty," Ned stared at him, feeling something crack in his chest. This was not the king Robert had wanted. This was a boy dreaming of crowns and feasts while good men bled out in the mud. "If you do not ride," Ned said, his voice iron, "then I will. The North will not sit idle while our kin suffer." For a heartbeat, silence held the chamber like a knife pressed to a throat. Loras Tyrell bristled, one hand dropping to the hilt of his sword. Several of the Reach lords muttered darkly. Renly only smiled, lazy and dangerous. "You speak boldly, Lord Stark, but you are not king." Ned rose slowly, the weight of ice at his hip grounding him. "No, but I am Warden of the North, and the North remembers." Without waiting for dismissal, he turned and left the chamber, his cloak billowing behind him like the gathering storm. He had gambled once on Renly's ambition, thinking it the lesser evil. He would not gamble again. That night he met with trusted men in the quiet of his solar NU 2014 men like Jory Castle, survivors of the purge that might have taken them if they hadn't moved quickly after Renly's coup. They spoke in low voices of ravens sent to Robb, of secret preparations for the Northmen to march under their own banners if need be. Catelyn stood in the corner, pale but proud. "If Robb comes," she said, "he will come with Winterfell's fury at his back." Ned nodded grimly, "And gods help any who stand against him." In the darkness outside, the city churned with unrest. The poor cried for food, the merchants cursed the new taxes, and whispers of Lannister revenge crawled through the taverns like plague rats. King's Landing, like its new king, wore a crown that was already beginning to tarnish, and across the black waters of the Blackwater Bay, unseen by any in the Red Keep, a single ship slipped into the harbour under cover of night, bearing a message from Dragonstone. A message from Stannis Baratheon, cold and pitiless, a message that would soon shatter every fragile alliance Ned had fought to build. The letter was short and sharp, like a dagger slipped between the ribs. Stannis Baratheon, true-born brother of King Robert, declared himself the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms and denounced Renly as a usurper. Worse yet, he named Renly's supporters U-2014, including Eddard Stark's U-2014, as traitors to the true line of succession. Ned read the letter once, then twice, his heart sinking lower with every word. There was no mistaking it. Stannis was preparing for war not only against the Lannisters, but against Renly U-2019's entire court, against Ned himself. He summoned Renly at once. The meeting was held in the Red Keep U-2019's inner courtyard, away from prying eyes but not from the heavy, oppressive heat of the midday sun. Renly arrived with Ser Loras at his side, still wearing that boyish smirk that made Ned U-2019's teeth grind together. He tossed the letter on the stone table between them with a casual flick of his wrist. "So Stannis finally found his balls," Renly said. "Shame he couldn't find a crown that fits better." "He will not simply bluster," Ned warned. "He will act. And when he does, he will bring fire and steel against us all." Renly laughed, the sound bright and brittle. "Let him come. I have the Reach behind me and half the Stormlands. The North, too, if you are as loyal as you claim, Lord Stark." Ned said nothing for a long moment. His silence said everything. Renly's smile thinned. "You are thinking of switching sides. I can see it." "I am thinking," Ned said slowly, "that every day we delay in petty squabbles gives Tywin Lannister time to carve up the Riverlands and spread his rot across the realm. If you and Stannis war with each other, the realm will bleed while the lions grow fat on our folly." "There can be only one king," Renly snapped, "and it will not be Stannis." "Perhaps it should be," Ned said quietly. The words hung in the air like thunderclouds. Renly U-2019's face darkened, and Ser Loras U-2019's hand slid meaningfully to the hilt of his sword. Ned ignored the threat. He was beyond fear now, beyond caution. He had pledged to serve the realm, not a boy playing king with a borrowed army. When Ned left the meeting, he knew he had made an enemy. Perhaps the most dangerous kind, U-2014 an enemy, who still smiled to his face. That night, he sent a raven to Stannis under heavy guard, proposing terms. He offered the North U-2019's neutrality if Stannis would recognize northern independence after the war. A bold move, one that could cost him everything. But the safety of his children and his people came before crowns and courts. Meanwhile, he ordered Sansa and Arya prepared to leave the city. He would not make the same mistake twice. He would not leave his daughters hostages to southern games. The city too felt the change in the air. Riots broke out in Flea Bottom over bread. Gold cloaks, once loyal to Ned U-2019's gold, now answered to richer purses. Whispers of Renly U-2019's frustration grew louder. Some said he cursed Ned U-2019's name in the halls of the Red Keep. Others said he plotted something darker. And through it all, Cersei Lannister waited in Maegor's U-2019's holdfast, silent and patient as a viper under a rock. She had not yet made her move, but Ned could feel her watching, calculating. One misstep, and everything he had built would collapse. But it was too late for caution now. Ned had thrown the die. The North had made its choice. U-2014, and winter, as it always did, was coming. The betrayal came not with horns or banners, but in a whisper passed from lord to lord, guard to guard. Ned realized too late that the gold, cloaks he had once trusted, were no longer his. Gold, heavier and sweeter than any promises he could make, had changed their loyalty. Renly, with his charming smiles and easy promises, had outplayed him. It began when Arya disappeared. One moment she was safely tucked within the Red Keep under trusted guard. The next, she was simply gone, like mist under the sun. Ned tore apart. Half the castle looking for her, sending men he trusted into every alley, every sewer tunnel, every whorehouse. But the city swallowed her up, and no one dared speak of what they knew. Sansa, terrified, clung to her chambers. She begged Ned to let her stay hidden, to send her away to Winterfell. He promised her over and over that he would. But even promises weighed little in a city where trust had become a dead man's luxury. On the 5th day after Arya's disappearance, the trap closed. Ned was summoned to a council meeting. An urgent matter, they said. He knew it was a risk. Every step to the council chambers felt like a march to the gallows. But honor, damn him, still pulled him forward. He entered the chamber to find Renly seated at the head of the table, dressed not for governance but for battle. Sir Loras stood behind him, hand resting lightly on the pommel of his ornate sword. Around them, members of the small council sat stiff and silent, eyes averted. "Lord Stark," Renly said, voice rich with false warmth, "it grieves me to say this, but you have been found guilty of conspiring with our enemies. Your actions threaten the stability of the realm. You are under arrest." Ned laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "And what proof do you offer? Words whispered by cowards, lies bought with gold." Renly U 2019's smile never faltered. "Proof is a luxury we can no longer afford. Stability, however, is priceless." At that, the doors behind Ned slammed open, and gold cloaks poured into the chamber. Ned U 2019's hand went to ice, but he saw it. Instantly, U 2014, the trap was too tight, the numbers too great. If he drew now, he would die a traitor. 2019's death, cut down by the very men he had once commanded. Slowly, stiffly, he lifted his hand away from the sword. "Take him to the black cells," Renly ordered, "until the realm decides his fate." As the guards seized him, Ned met Renly U 2019's gaze one last time. No hatred, no fury, just a grim, weary understanding. He had gambled on a boy's ambition and a city's broken honor, and he had lost. They dragged him through the twisting, stinking corridors of the Red Keep, past servants who turned their faces away, past lords who once bowed low, but now would not meet his eyes. Catelyn was nowhere to be found. In the darkest depths of the castle, where the walls wept with mildew, and old ghosts whispered, they threw Ned Stark into a cell and slammed the iron gate behind him. Above, the city of King Wu 2019's landing roared on, blind to the fall of one more honest man. And in the distant north, banners bearing the direwolf of House Stark were already flying high, marching not for Renly, nor for Stannis, but for vengeance. Winter was not coming. It had already arrived. The black cells stripped Ned Stark of everything but time. The days blended into nights, the thin straw mat beneath him turning damp and foul. His wounds, both visible and buried deep within, festered in the stale air. Yet his mind stayed sharp. Every hour he spent in that darkness, he thought of Winterfell. He thought of Catelyn, of Arya lost in the streets, of Sansa trapped among vipers, and of Robb marching south with the full fury of the North. He prayed they would not be foolish. He prayed they would be ruthless. Above ground, the city convulsed in unrest. The Tyrells tightened their hold around Renly's court, growing fat on favors and promises. Gold cloaks patrolled the streets with heavier hands, beating peasants for crumbs of bread, dragging dissenters to dungeons darker than Ned's own. The people no longer sang songs of Renly the Beautiful. They muttered dark curses and spit at his banners. In the Tower of the Hand, Catelyn Stark moved like a ghost. She had been placed under watch for her own protection, but no door had yet been made that could truly bar a wolf. She sent messages in secret, using coin and favors to reach the few friends they had left. Varys, slippery and soft-spoken, offered hints and half-promises. Littlefinger, smirking and dangerous, dangled false hope with one hand while sharpening, a knife with the other. But it was Ser Barristan Selmy who came to her aid at last. Old, proud and disgusted by what the realm had become under boys playing kings, Barristan risked everything to smuggle Catelyn a simple truth. Ned would not be given a trial. He would be made an example. Renly fears losing the city, Barristan said in the dead of night, his armor left behind to move unseen. And he fears the north rising. You must flee. Find your son. Find your army. Strike before they hang your lord husband from the Red Keep. Walls. Catelyn U2019's face, so often a mask of grief and restraint, hardened into something terrible and cold. She was a Tully, born of rivers and loyalty. But she had become a Stark too, U2014, shaped by snow, sharpened by ice. I will not flee, she said. I will fight. Meanwhile, in the fields beyond Moat Cailin, Robb Stark broke through the marshes with 20,000 Northmen at his back. Word of his father U2019's imprisonment had reached him days earlier, carried by a bloodied raven. He wore no crown, but he wore a King U2019's fury. Lords Karstark, Umber and Bolton rode at his side, their voices loud and eager for battle. We march for King U2019's landing, Robb declared before the banners of the North. We march for our father, and we march for the North, who bows to no false king. The lords roared their approval, and wolves howled into the misty night. Back in the black cells, Ned Stark knelt in the damp straw, whispering prayers to gods old and new. He knew time was slipping away from him, knew he might never see his family again. But he also knew this: the North would not be broken. Not by gold, not by crowns, not by pretty boys with crowns too heavy for their heads. The North remembers. And now, all of Westeros would remember too. The night before his execution, Ned Stark was offered a bargain. They came for him under the shroud of darkness. Not guards, not jailers, but Petyr Baelish himself, smug and soft-spoken, slipping through the blackness like a viper. Your family can be spared, Littlefinger whispered through the bars. Your precious daughters sent back to Winterfell. All you must do is confess. Ned stared at him, hollow-eyed. Confess to what? Confess to treason, Baelish said, voice dripping with false kindness. Renly needs a public victory. The people are restless. Your death would quiet them, but your confession would break them, make you the villain, make him the savior. Ned sat in the straw, hands bound, heart torn. Every instinct screamed against it. His honor, his father's teachings, the old gods, all demanded the truth. Yet he thought of Sansa, weeping and terrified, of Arya lost, in a city that would chew her bones clean, of Robb marching to war, risking thousands of northern lives for a father who might already be beyond saving. You ask me to trade honor for their lives, Ned said, voice low. I ask you to choose which legacy matters more, Baelish said, smiling, a dead man's honor or living children. When he left, Ned remained in the darkness alone, the decision curdling in his gut. The next morning dawned bright and pitiless. They dragged him through the Red Keep like a prize animal, past jeering gold cloaks and lords fattened on the new regime. Catelyn was nowhere to be seen, but he caught glimpses of Sansa, weeping behind a wall of armored men. He prayed Arya was still hidden somewhere far from this horror. At the steps of the great sept of Baelor a crowd had gathered, thousands strong. Renly sat atop a grand white horse, gleaming in armor too polished for real battle. At his side stood Loras Tyrell, smug and silent, and behind them the Lords of the Reach and the Stormlands arrayed like a parade. Ned was forced to kneel. The High Septon read out charges: treason, conspiracy, betrayal. Lies layered thick upon lies, and the crowd, drunk on fear and bloodlust, roared for punishment. When they bade him speak, Ned looked at the crowd, at Renly's shining crown, at the wolves hidden among the sheep. He remembered the words of his father before his own execution. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. I confess, Ned Stark said, voice carrying across the square. The crowd hushed. I confess to protecting the realm from liars and usurpers. I confess to placing the lives of my daughters above my pride. And I confess that though you may kill me today, the North will never kneel to false kings. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Renly's face twisted in frustration. This was not the confession he had wanted. The High Septon stumbled, unsure. Renly rose in his saddle, voice carrying over the heads of the crowd. "Let it be known that Eddard Stark has confessed to crimes against the realm. By the grace of King Renly Baratheon, he is hereby sentenced to death." A blade flashed. Ned closed his eyes and thought not of crowns nor courts, but of the cool winds of Winterfell, of snow on the high towers, and the laughter of children he might never see grown. Then the sword fell. But even as his blood darkened the stones of Baelor's sept, the north roared to life. And vengeance was not far behind. Word of Eddard Stark's death travelled faster than any raven. It rode on the tongues of merchants, on the tears of small folk, on the rage of lords. By the time Robb Stark heard the news, he was already deep into the Riverlands, his army cutting a bloody path southward. The young wolf did not weep when he heard. He did not speak. He simply turned to his lords, Great John Umber, Rickard Karstark, Rose Bolton, and said in a voice hard enough to crack stone, "There will be no more talk of kneeling." They rode with fire in their hearts. In Riverrun, Robb was crowned, not as a prince nor as a lord, but as king in the north, the first Stark to wear that title in 300 years. The River Lords bent the knee too, not out of love but out of survival. The Lannisters were enemies, yes, but now so too was Renly Baratheon. No southerner would rule them. No golden boy with reach banners and sweet songs could soothe the north. The pack had lost its alpha, but it had birthed a king. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Renly's crown weighed heavier every day. His court grew more fractious, the Tyrells whispering that he should strike Robb Stark before the boy could consolidate power. Renly, blinded by his own ambition, listened too late. Robb's vengeance came with wolves at his side and fire at his back. The Battle of Bitterbridge marked the beginning of the end for Renly's fragile reign. Robb's northern forces, hardened by ice and loss, smashed through the Reach levies with brutal precision. The Tyrells, for all their shining armor and fine, banners crumbled when faced with a northern winter's rage. They said the river ran red for 3 days after. Renly himself never reached the battlefield. His court splintered before the fighting even began. Lords once loyal to him abandoned him in the night, swayed by whispers of Robb's growing power, and by darker rumors that Stannis Baratheon was marching on Storm's End with sorcery at his back. One night, Renly sat in his solar, crown cast upon the floor, hands trembling as he stared at a map littered with fallen stones. "You were supposed to save the realm," Loras Tyrell said bitterly, his voice low and broken. "I only wanted," Renly started, but the words died in his throat. He did not know what he had wanted anymore. Glory, perhaps, a crown, a song sung in his honor. But the realm had not needed a boy king. It had needed strength, strength that now wore a direwolf's cloak. In the end, Renly fled the city under the cover of darkness, abandoning King's Landing to the chaos he had helped create. No songs were sung for him, no cheers followed his retreat. King's Landing tore itself apart in his absence, Lannister loyalists rising up, Stannis' agents slipping poison into wells, the small folk rioting for food and vengeance alike, and above it all, a cold wind blew from the north. Robb Stark did not march on King's Landing immediately. He knew better. He secured the Riverlands, he bled the Reach, and he built alliances among old enemies who now saw him as the only hope against the southern madness. Winter was not just coming. Winter had arrived wearing a crown of ice, riding a tide of vengeance. Eddard Stark's death had not broken the north. It had forged it into a weapon the south would never forget. And in the silent snows of the north, the old god smiled. The north remembers, and the world would tremble beneath its roar.